top-down change management just doesn't work. One of the many things that frustrates me about the methodologies that are most commonly used in change management is that at the center of it all, they're really looking at top-down paternalistic models to implementing change. And what actually works is something quite different. But in this episode, I'm going to get into why top-down as an approach just doesn't work and what we can do about it. I'm Natalia Loback, and this is the Change Course podcast. I've spent my career leading complex change and transformation in organizations. And over my career, I've discovered what makes complex transformational change stick. Connected change is all about leading successful change within the context of the organization. And here at the Change Course podcast, we're all about making change sustainable. So listen in, drop us a like, a comment, and let us know how we can help you connect and change. Top-down change management. Okay, I know a lot of you out there who've done the courses, who've done the reading, who are certified. I know that you might take issue with what I have to say on this, but I implore you, open your mind a little bit, think about this critically. The world has changed, and change needs to change with it. That was a lot of the same word, but really at the center of it all is the understanding that how modern life operates and how workplaces operate in this current culture means that top-down change management will not and does not work. Okay, let's be honest. Sure, absolutely, it would have worked really well in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And when the main methodologies were published in the 90s, let me remind you when that was. But when those methodologies were published in the 90s, the boomer generation was still the majority of the workforce. And yeah, you can say a lot about how that generation approaches work and how that generation approaches life and management and the models, the organizational models that are put into place generally with this cohort as the main leaders in the workplace. You see a lot of hierarchy, you see a lot of top-down management. And there is this idea or this essence of, absolutely, we're going to make the decisions and we know what's best for you. We have the knowledge, we have the skills, we're the leaders, we know what's best for you. And there is a bit of that flavor when you look at Kotter, the 8-step model, and when you look at PROSCI's ADKAR. Now hear me out. Let me first make the case of why these are top-down. First of all, they're individualistic models. So they focus on the individual going through the journey of change and the relationship between the individual and the leader. They don't look at the relationships between the individuals in the organization. All they're really concerned about is the one individual and the leaders or leader. Again, very much a cultural component and a generational component to how we look at this. Boomer generation was all about individuality, all about defining themselves against the status quo, defining themselves against the norm, and the rise of individualism in popular culture. Absolutely attributed to this huge generational and cultural force. And so you see that reflected in the literature. Of course, you see that reflected in what worked. I mean, both Kotter and PROSCI based the models on research, but research is past looking. You can only do research based on the data that you already have. And the data that's out there when they were developed in the 90s was from all of those previous decades. So 70s, 80s, and early 90s, to really look at how organizations managed change and how you could do it better. The other thing is that in the 80s and 90s, you really had the rise of the corporation, these big organizations, very hierarchical, because you didn't have the technology, that democratizing force of technology that essentially came through in a giant wildfire and flattened management structures in organizations. And I'm going to get to that and the effect that that had. But what you see in those two models is an individualistic approach to change. And you see the leadership really being part of the development of the change vision and the development of the change plan. So you have your guiding coalition, as Kotter calls them. You have your change sponsorship, as you see in ADKAR. And stakeholders are recipients of the change. Stakeholders receive the change. They don't develop it, and they're not part of it. They're expected to receive it and implement it. So when you look at how the top-down model works, it's focused on making the stakeholders aware of what's happening, creating a false sense of urgency or fear in order to incite change, as you see with Kotter and the burning platform. Focusing on creating desire. That's the flip side of that coin. So instead of using fear as the motivator, you're trying to create desire and excitement around the change. Then looking at how people are actually going to implement, which PROSCI's ADKAR does take one step further, but you're looking at how are people actually going to do the change. So let's make sure that they know how to do it. They've been trained. They have the knowledge. They have the ability, so they can actually do it when it comes time to it, right? And then lastly, looking at the reinforcement. So how do we continue that change? How do we make it sustainable? But it's all very much based on what is the individual doing? That's why when we look at change literature and we look at how change is viewed out there in the world, right? Resistance is seen as personal. Resistance is seen as people not wanting to change because the models look at a top-down, paternalistic, individualistic view of making change happen. Okay, so I've made my case for why the models are top-down. Now let me explain why they don't work today. Now, I don't really care about what happened in the past. And you know what? Like, we can't go back in time. If there was a time machine, let me tell you, I could definitely use it for a lot of things. But we don't have time machines and we can't go to the past. What we have to look at is what our organizations are like today and why these models no longer work. I mean, if you're looking at a top-down paternalistic way of implementing change, and that's what the organization thinks they want to do, you've probably got, a very specific cohort in your management team, in your senior management. You probably have some very specific ideas about how the organization works, and you're going to see a disconnect and detachment between the leadership and the people who actually work and do and live and breathe and operate within that organization. I have seen this multiple times. I saw this, as recently as 6 months ago in an organization. And there are specific characteristics, but what you do notice is that the organization will struggle with implementing change, because the very first thing I had to do when coming into the organization was work through the assumptions of the leadership and work through the assumptions and start to change how they thought about things in order to make change happen. And honestly, because that's a huge cultural and mindset transformation, I can't always do all of it. We can't always get there, and it can be a really big challenge. Some organizations will fail at change because of that. So when you're going into an organization, take a look and see what the norms and the expectations are around how leadership operates in the organization. So why doesn't this work anymore today? Honestly, walking into places that have this kind of structure and feel, it's like I feel like walking into the Stone Age. It's like going back in time, and it's quite difficult, especially because you do see that cultural upswell from the people who work in the organization. And it's very different. Today, we live in a society and in organizations that have been greatly democratized by the introduction of technology. And no more is your work the biggest status marker that you have in your life. You could be doing a million other things. You have access to the globe through a tiny little computer that sits in your pocket. And it's incredible and amazing. But what has that done? It's changed the way organizations operate because we now have technology and connection embedded into the very fabric of organizations. Now, when I see extremely innovative and organizations that are really on the forefront of their industries, this is what I see. I see very flat and diverse, let me make that really clear, diverse management teams. And diversity is not always about just the way you look. There are also other things we need to think about when we're thinking about diversity. So I see very flat and diverse management teams. I see leaders that are consultative as opposed to authoritative. And it's a very different way of operating in an organization. As organizations have evolved, you're now seeing knowledge workers in many organizations becoming deep experts in areas that they work in. So it's very difficult to manage somebody who's a deep expert in the old model, because in the old model, the folks who sat at the top of the pyramid were the ones with the most knowledge and expertise built over the years and years and years of working in that corporation or working in that industry. So a 35-year career bought you a ticket to the C-suite, and nobody could argue with you because you had the most experience and you knew everything. And so, of course, it was up to you to lead and to tell those folks who were less experienced exactly what they had to do. But now that's flipped. So you're often seeing expertise be a leadership driver, but management is a very different skill or very different orientation in the organization. Flattening of the organizations, way fewer levels. And so when you are embarking on change in that kind of organization, you're mainly looking at leaders to see how much influence do they have? Are they well regarded by their peers? Do people listen to them? Did they have great relationships with the people that they work with? Furthermore, the generational impact has really shifted as well. You're seeing millennials taking up the most seats inside organizations. And as the children of the boomers, they've inherited a number of the boomer traits, but they've also inherited and built this incredible literacy of technology. And there is an expectation that expertise is respected. And there is also this understanding that expertise and age don't necessarily go together. And so when you are looking at an organization with this new lens and trying to use a top-down paternalistic change model to help the organization change. And the majority of your organization is made up of experts who have a high degree of autonomy and critical thinking and are incredibly experienced and smart and, have this huge amount of experience in their own field, but also have a huge amount of confidence and also this respect for individualism, which kind of goes along with the, generation that they were most influenced by, but then also this incredible connectedness with the collective and their peers, which is different. This makes using those top-down, I told you so models completely ineffective. So what do? I mean, this is why I developed Connected Change, to be completely honest, because I started to see how organizations were changing. And when I was starting to work in change, I was leading change in areas that I had zero expertise in. So my approach had to be very different. Coming in as a change leader in an organization where I might have had really deep knowledge of the industry, that's great. But the subject area of the various functions that I was working with, I'm not an accountant. I'm not a financial manager. I don't know anything about operational finance. So when I came in to start leading a finance transformation, I needed to build that team of stakeholders who could support me and also support the change. So looking at your stakeholders as partners in the change and as the very important people that you want to be including as you're building and implementing that change and as you're moving through each of the important phases is a key differential. Stakeholders are partners. Stakeholders are part of the change. They are not the recipients of the change. Absolutely, you're still looking at communications as a key vehicle. You're still looking at training as a key vehicle. But this is focused on behavioral change. It's not focused on change, period. There's a lot more that happens before we get to implementation that is critical. And including stakeholders in very specific ways and bringing that matrixed feel into your change program is what you need to be doing. Very different from sitting in the room with the CFO and the CEO, the Chief Technology Officer, and me, and trying to figure out how we're going to build this change, come up with all the plans, and then start rolling out via Kotter or ADKAR, right? Very different. That's not how it worked, and that was not what made us successful. So I wanted to bring you an example from some really interesting coursework that I did, and coming from the place where I've worked the longest. My background comes from healthcare, so health services, delivery, and implementation. And healthcare is a really interesting microcosm of exactly what I'm talking about. So in 2018, I had the really unique opportunity to go down to Harvard University and study for a very short period. I did an executive education course there on what has been coined meta leadership. And the professors of that course were incredible. They just had such knowledge and experience. And it was focused on healthcare leadership. But I also found that these concepts applied very well to what I was seeing happening in corporations and in organizations that were outside of healthcare as well. So the key idea about meta leadership is that you might be a leader, but your mandate is not to tell people what to do. No. Your goal is really to identify the vision for the organization, develop that strategy, and then start mobilizing people to move towards the strategic objectives. but mobilize, not paternalistic. Don't tell people what to do. Because let me tell you something, in healthcare, you can't tell people what to do. Physicians come into healthcare organizations with 8-9 years of education plus practical experience. And often by the time they get to a really elite organization, they've got 20 years in their career already. And so when you're talking to physician leaders, these are highly, highly focused, highly knowledgeable individuals in their own field. And it's not just one. You're not just a physician leader and you know everything about medicine. No way. Maybe you're an expert in emergency medicine. Maybe you're an expert in trauma. Maybe you're an expert because you're an orthopedic surgeon. Each of those areas has very specific, deep knowledge that is not transferable to somebody else. If you're an expert in internal medicine, you don't know anything about orthopedic surgery. So when you go into, let's say, you go into a hospital, you have to go in for an emergency, something's happened to you, in you go, you're going to the hospital. When you get there, you're seen by a team of people. You might be seen by a couple different physicians, depending on what's going on with you. You will be seen by a nursing leader. You'll be seen perhaps by a physiotherapist or a respiratory therapist or a cardiology specialist. I mean, the list goes on, right? But each of those areas have unique and deep knowledge. Each of those individuals are leaders within their field. It's not like you can go and say, I want to speak to the manager, because who are you going to get? Like, it just, you're going to get somebody else who maybe has maybe 1 or 2 more years experience. It doesn't really work that way, right? So when you think about the concept of meta leadership, it's really this idea of leading across deep areas of expertise. Now, some people might say leading across silos. That's an interesting way to think about it or visualize it. But that's essentially what you're doing in the modern workplace. And as a change leader, you're leading and helping your sponsor to take that role of really leading across each of these deep areas of expertise. So if you don't know a lot about each of the areas of expertise, and you can guess that there might be impact to each of the individuals in those areas based on the change, why wouldn't you involve them in the change? Because telling them what to do is going to get you the opposite result. What you actually need to be doing is including and creating that matrixed view of your change team that reflects the way the organization is now structured and now operates. Very different than it did 30 years ago. And this is my real challenge with those main methodologies that are out there. I mean, this is something that they're missing. They're really, really missing this. And good change leaders and practitioners get around this issue by working in different ways. But as far as I know, connected change is the first methodology that addresses this head on. And I haven't found anything else that really gets into how looking at organizations as a matrix and looking at how you're leading across deep areas of expertise and how you're involving people, stakeholders, experts in the design of the change and the delivery of that change is part of what makes you successful. And as I mentioned in a couple previous episodes, part of what actually helps reduce resistance as you're going into the implementation of change. Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, I invite you to like, share, rate, and subscribe because it helps others find us. Change Course is brought to you by Charthouse Advisory Services and ConnectedChange.com. Our music is Levity by Emily Clausen. Show notes have moved. We're now at ConnectedChange.com. So visit us there under the Change Course podcast page, and you'll find a list of all the resources that I've mentioned here today. While you're visiting us, sign up for the Change Navigator newsletter. You'll keep on top of all things change, and every month we are sharing exclusive content and resources only with our subscribers. So don't miss out. Sign up at ConnectedChange.com. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late to change course.